about Jimmy the Saint?
Jimmy the Saint was a good man
You're different, Jimmy. You got decency.
who left behind a bad world.
You glide.
I glide?
You glide. It's a very attractive quality. You're a thing to be amazed by.
Then one day, the old boss forced him back.
Why me?
I got a call in the note.
What do you want done?
It's just an action. It's not a piece of work.
Look at this. All the Pig brothers from back in the day.
One-shot deal. We're in, we're out. Are you in?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You still crazy, man?
Well, I am what I am.
It would be smooth.
Bill, you're gonna be with Jimmy in the moving van. Bring the kid there, we scare him, and that's it.
It would be easy.
How's it looking, big man?
Looking good.
It would be the biggest mistake
Can I see some ID, please?
he ever made.
I'll give you ID! You got 48 hours. Leave Denver.
Now, time is running out.
We already made a call. The guy from El Paso, Mr. Shush, the most lethal contract killer west of the Mississippi.
And he's got 48 hours
Buckwheats. Buckwheats for all of us, Jimmy. Even you.
to make the wrong things right.
I met someone. I don't want her hurt.
Didn't you learn nothing from me?
We don't stand up for each other, we're gone.
Montero's brothers out of Albuquerque have been called in.
Party!
Andy Garcia, Christopher Lloyd, Treat Williams, William Forsythe, Gabrielle Anwar, Bill Nunn, Jack Warden, Fairuza Balk, and Christopher Walken.
You know I could look at you forever. I wouldn't have to do anything else.
Things to do in Denver when you're dead.
Hey, folks, welcome back. You are watching Unfinished Business. What? Deep Dive! This is, before I even start, hi, I'm Dev Galashot, Unfinished B2, your host. And with me, as always, is my co-host, Andre Joseph of AJ Epics.
Rest in peace, Treat Williams.
True, because he is one of the stars of the movie we're going to talk about today, which is Things to Do in Denver When You're Dead from 1995. This movie is about a small-time crew coming together who are meant to scare off the boyfriend of a girl who used to date a mobster, his son. And, of course, they botch the job, and then they have to run or go on the run when the mobster decides to take out their failure out on them. This film is directed by Gary Fletter, who directed Runaway Jury, The Express, Imposter, Don't Say a Word, Kiss the Girls, and many television shows, and written by Scott Rosenberg, who wrote one of my favorite romantic films, Beautiful Girls. He's also behind Con Air, one of my most reviled films, Kangaroo Jack, Gone in 60 Seconds. Look, Jerry Bruckheimer has him on speed dial. But he also wrote High Fidelity, Jumanji, The Next Level, and Jumanji, Welcome to the Jungle, the current rock version. I mean, every time I want to say something nice, I see his next credit. He also wrote Venom. But he also wrote Disturbing Behavior, a movie I personally like. And he's also infamously known as the screenwriter who was involved when Steve Buscemi got stabbed in a bar fight during the making of an old Deep Dive Domestic Disturbance with Vince Vaughn. If anything, he's infamous for that. But this movie stars Andy Garcia as a cast that includes Christopher Lloyd, William Forsythe, Bill Nunn, the late, great Treat Williams, Bill Cobbs, for those of you who know who he is Jack Warden, Steve Buscemi, Fairuza Balk, Gabrielle Anwar. There's somebody we haven't talked about enough. The great Christopher Walken. And for those of you who are in the small-time character actors, Don Stark, Willie Garson, Jenny McCarthy's first movie role. Also, Tiny Lister Jr., Don Cheadle, is Glenn Plummer, and Marshall Bell fill out the cast. Now, this movie is infamous because I'll even admit, when I saw the trailer first, before I ever saw this film, it looked like a Tarantino ripoff because it's a crime film. It has quirky dialogue, kind of made up dialect. I will tell you, honestly, the thing that convinced me to watch this movie is a little magazine at the time that still lives called Film Threat. They gave it a rave review. They praised Treat Williams, and, it seemed after this film, Treat Williams had kind of a resurgence because he had a comeback after this film. Not the size of Robert Forster's, but, big enough that he was more working again. And it's very well deserved because even though he's not the main character, his character seems to have the most quirks out of all of them. I mean, we'll talk about some of his quirks a little later. But, I mean, come on, there's another solid role for Bill Nunn, as all the characters have weird names. His character is Easy Wind, which sounds like a farting joke. You have Andy Garcia as Jimmy the Saint, Christopher Lloyd Pieces because his fingers keep falling off. I never got William Forsythe's Frenchies nickname. I never got why they called him that. I mean, come on, you have a character named Mr. Shush or Mr. Shh, like Steve Buscemi, Christopher Walken as the man with the plan, replacing James Caan, who had to go to rehab, so couldn't play the role. Out of all the reasons Steve dropped out of a role, it's the first time somebody actually admitting, and to go to rehab. I'm like, okay, films recommended this film. I'll admit, I didn't see it in theaters. I remember it playing at the Angelica, but I never took the bait and went to go see it. So I watched it on home video. And of course, it's put out by Miramax. And, while it has that Tarantino ripoff feel, it's a beast all its own, too. And I really enjoyed it. It's the most vivid Andy Garcia had been in a while in a role. Because he's, the Latin lover, Mr. Smooth, who things just keep going bad for. And then finally in one scene lets it all loose when he goes to defend Fairuza Balk's character, who's been roughed up by one of her Johns, even though he's not her pimp. It's just a character actor's movie. And, Treat Williams is the icing of the cake as Critical Bill. I'm shocked I don't see many more Instagram or Twitter handles with that name. Whose character, for fun, beats up dead bodies to keep his knuckles tough, and who in prison apparently ate doo-doo. And that is why Easy Wind doesn't want to work with him. But I like how he defends it by saying, it was only a little piece. So, I mean, if this was any other genre, this would totally be a comedy. But it's more of a, crime thriller. I love this film. This is one of the few films that I think is good, but I would love if I could remake this movie. Like Clue. It doesn't need one, but it would be interesting to remake it. I mean, the slang. Who thinks of buckwheats as a punishment? Where you shoot a guy up the asshole, and apparently he lives for 20 minutes bleeding out. Who even thinks of stuff like that? And how come he wrote so many action films and never put that in another action film script? That could have been his signature. Like Tarantino with feet. This movie, it has a necessary love story, but I'm not going to talk about that. I mean, it has Gabrielle Anwar, and I'm just like, wow. Who incidentally beat out Cameron Diaz for the role, which I found shocking. I only recently found out about, but it works better because then if Cameron Diaz was in it, it feels like this would be like, hey, see Cameron Diaz before The Mask, rather than appreciating the film on its own merits. Andre, what did you think, or when did you first hear about this movie, really?
Chris Gore is a strange guy. I really don't know what his deal is, a film threat. So that's the first thing off my head.
Okay.
So I do remember when it was advertised and passing by it at the Blockbuster video store. Didn't know anything about it other than that Eddie Garcia was in it. I didn't know it had this whole ensemble cast. Only later did I find out it was like one of those Tarantino knockoffs. So when you recommended it, that was the first time I've seen the movie all the way through. And yeah, I kind of had a mixed vibe with it overall. I think the cast is impressive. Treat Williams definitely steals the show in his role out of everybody in that whole group. Fairuza Balk, I didn't know if that whole thing with her wanting to get pregnant was going to go anywhere until it did. Pretty much, I guess, showing how very whimsical this movie is, that there is a premise, but then you have all these side premises that I guess it's also supposed to connect to like one theme about life and death. And, the fact that Andy Garcia works for, I guess, like a funeral home company, that's kind of what he does. But yeah, definitely is one of those movies that it feels sleek. It seems like it's got this great premise, and for some reason, it doesn't feel quite even. I don't know why. And maybe that just comes down to not the acting, but just the way it's written. And I know Scott Rosenberg, he wrote some of the stuff based on, I guess, like his father was having cancer.
Yeah, he wrote it in 2 weeks after his death.
Yeah, so that kind of like, I guess the theme kind of added to the script. But yeah, kind of an interesting oddball movie. Christopher Walken, I think, is great in it. And some of the stuff he does kind of, meme glory right there, like anything else he ever does in his movies. So I didn't really leave it with any major impression, to be honest. I kind of like forgot it after a while. I thought the ending was weird.
Well, see, to me, it's one of those movies that, like you said, you can forget about, but then when you hear about it, or maybe you see it on television, you start remembering its strengths more when you see it again. Because you're like, oh yeah, that was pretty good. Like, again, at the time, it felt like maybe what a lot of movies that were coming out at the time, or crime films at least, like The Grave with Craig Sheffer by the Pate brothers, it felt kind of similar, like kind of a quirky crime thriller. But now, all these years later, you kind of appreciate it because it's like, now you kind of want those crime thriller stories. And now everything is like either a Michael Mann movie by the books, or it's like, oh, let's make it more comedic, So I kind of miss these type of films. I'll admit, Andy Garcia's romance of Gabrielle Anwar, his dialogue's a little overwritten, And maybe that's one of the problems of the films, that, how one of the things of directing is you're supposed to show, not tell. And this film, unfortunately, does a lot of telling in certain scenes. But I think also what might throw you off about the film is, like you said, it has so many different types of genres that it plays to in different scenes. Like 1 minute it's this romantic film where he wants to get this much younger girl because he's positively in love with her. And even as a gangster, you're shocked he's like, he believes in love at first sight. And then you have the comedic scenes. Then you have the scenes between Bill Cobbs and Jack Warden as like older type gang, in the crime genre character. They're kind of the Greek chorus, kind of explaining people's backgrounds. And then, you have the heavy Christopher Walken, who's supposed to be paralyzed from the neck down. So I don't know. Sometimes it looks like his shoulders might be moving because he's just getting into the rhythm of things. I think it's strangely, this is the first time I've ever heard Christopher Walken ever use the N-word in a movie too. It's the first time, well, I don't know, maybe this is why Scott Rosenberg and Steve Buscemi are friends, because only in this and Con Air do you ever see Steve Buscemi really play a badass, who takes out a whole black gangster club on his own, I also like that there's this roving thing like, oh, even though Mr. Shish is the best, if he can't do the job, we have like these Spanish brothers, which then of course then started making me think of Breaking Bad, So I'm just like, or maybe Breaking Bad saw this movie and kind of borrowed that idea. But I just like the inventiveness. The thing is, though, I'm going to admit, it feels like a really good graphic novel made into a movie because it has that comic sensibility to it. And I, for one, I guess I tapped into that vibe. But again, it feels more written than necessarily directed, if that makes any sense. It's like, again, you can see it on the page in a graphic novel, but as a film, it seems to be more directed by its dialogue and script. Fairuza Balk, a great performance. Would have maybe gone with a different look for her character, but I guess she's supposed to be kind of the visual opposite of Gabrielle Anwar. Which Jack Ward and Bill Cobbs had more to do. I mean, Jenny McCarthy, she's not top billed. This was her first acting job. Most people just recognize her as a playmate. I felt sorry for William Forsythe's character for some odd reason. I don't know why. Christopher Lloyd, did they ever explain why his fingers were going? You know, and I have to agree with Critical Bill and everybody else in the movie. This is what makes it a movie. Jimmy, you knew better than to have Critical Bill take the lead. And even he says it, like, you knew better. This is all your fault. You know, and it reminded me of Don Cheadle's character in Devil in a Blue Dress. Like, you knew not to leave him in that car with me. You know, what do you think I was going to do? So, I like that Critical Bill, though, ends up being the toughest character in the film, too. And, you know, I felt like maybe the ending was a little too tacked on with the whole dream sequence and the afterlife. It was just like, don't really need it, you know. That's when it felt like, are we going into Suicide King type territory? But at least that was more cynical to its end. This seemed like, I want to be sweet towards the end to these characters. We're like, punished for 2 hours. Interesting. You know who was originally wanted to star in this film in Andy Garcia's role?
James Woods?
Yep. While a fine actor, and I'm sure he would love working with young actresses, I don't see the romantic part of James Woods here in this movie. And if James Woods was the lead, like Andy Garcia, even though he's a gangster in this film, I never feel afraid of him. James Woods is more of a threat, you know. Like, I would say, oh, James Caan's in rehab. I love Christopher Walken, but get James Woods to play the villain. He probably has no problem saying the N-word. You know?
Oh, I'm sure.
You know? Let's see. What other things, information do I have? Actually, the dialogue is mixing Vietnam and biker slang and some original dialogue. They say James Belushi was considered for a role, because why not? I'm thinking it would have been Frenchie's if he would have taken a role in this film. Yeah, and then it would have reminded one of Thief, though, if he would have taken that role. The title comes from a Warren Zevon song, just in case anybody was wondering. Because I think that's what first attracted me to the movie was the title. This is basically what I would say when side characters get their own film. That's what this film seems like it's all about mainly, you know. And I think it's one of the few times that Andy Garcia really gets to shine in a leading role. Because I mean, all the promise he had in like, what was it, Godfather 3 and The Untouchables, you know, not as vivid a role, but you kind of see it. Because I like the film, but I always kind of feel like Internal Affairs kind of grounded him. Because you're getting blown off the screen by Richard Gere playing a villain, you know? And I feel like he's always been stuck since then. Even when he's playing the villain in the Ocean's movie, he never quite feels like as dangerous as he should. Like if he was the character from Godfather 3. Because it's like, I don't know, it's like at a certain point, Andy Garcia stopped trying to put energy into his roles. You know, he's like more, I'm just going to stay laid back. So laid back that now he's in Expendables 4 for some odd reason.
Yeah, that's a weird choice to have in there.
I'm like, especially considering he's never really played an action lead role. Not even in like an HBO straight home video movie.
Oh.
So I'm just like, okay, what? Antonio Banderas wanted too much money to come back or something? And
Yeah, it seemed like Untouchables, him and Costner were supposed to be like the next big stars of the 90s. And of course, Costner had his moment. And Garcia, it just seemed like, well, we'll just settle him as the partner to Michael Douglas of Black Rain. He gets his head cut off. We'll put him in Internal Affairs, but Richard Gere's going to stand out more. And they had their feud behind the scenes. There was Jennifer 8. That was supposed to be something, and that didn't do anything for him. And then he just fell into like romantic comedies for a while.
And then, he shows up in this, but it's like, this is after his reign has like kind of bad. This is probably around the time where they're like, hey, we're going to put you in dangerous minds, but they are going to totally cut
Yeah, so just put it out.
And like, no offense, I feel like Jerry Bruckheimer owed him a good role for that, And do you think maybe it might have limited him, the fact that he was a Latin leading man at the time? Like racism might have had a thing to do with it?
I think that was one factor, and he's not really that tall. Like we see him in all these movies, he's not a big man. So then he gained weight as he got older. But
that was for a little while. It wasn't like he stayed, but like, hey guys.
Yeah, but you see him in a mule, like Jesus Christ.
Like, he's a mule. He's a mob boss. What? Mob boss supposed to be skinny and sexy? Jamie Clinton was like, no, girls gotta watch this movie and want me.
Well, yeah, he got that scene with the two hookers.
Exactly, and Bradley Cooper is too busy playing it straight to do anything. So, Andy Garcia. He's a guy who I felt just should have had better roles. I feel like once Antonio Banderas came onto the scene, it was like,
yeah,
Andy, it was like, oh, I'm going to play in When a Man Loves a Woman with Meg Ryan, where I play the husband who has to deal with her alcoholism. And, I'm like, he deserved better. If Tony Danza can have a big screen career, Andy Garcia definitely can.
Oh, much more Andy Garcia.
Yes, I didn't even know he feuded with Richard Gere during the making of Internal Affairs. And
yeah, their fights were pretty real.
I say we should put them in another movie together, since they're both kind of soft at the box office right now. I remember when his big comeback movie was supposed to be Just the Ticket, because that was the movie that Andrew Davis made after The Fugitive.
I was shocked about that.
With Alan Arkin, of all people, And it was like, yeah, and Andy McDowell, this romantic comedy. And it was like, I wasn't shocked it bombed, Or Andy Garcia's directorial debut, City Island, starring his daughter. Anyway, let me stop getting sidetracked. So, but would you recommend things to do in Denver when you're dead?
No.
Damn. I thought you'd think about it a little longer. Like I said, maybe that's why I feel like a remake could really bring out the promise of this film. But I really enjoy it. I'm not going to say it's the best film, but it's a film I admire for what it tries to do. Even if, it's easily credited as a Tarantino ripoff. I'm like, there are no feet in this movie. Okay, so, and I think like the thing with the funeral service that he runs of, terminally ill, I think that's where the major part of his father, dying might have come in, and maybe he viewed Jimmy the Saint as the type of guy his father was, maybe in his younger years, good-hearted, even if he's in a dishonest business. But I like the film, maybe it's the actors, maybe it's the writing, maybe it's a mixture of both, but I think it's a poem of a movie. That's how I'm going to put it. Dismantle that how you may. But do you have anything else to say about the movie?
Nah, I mean, like Gary Flyer did a lot of interesting stuff after that. He did Kiss the Girls and Don't Say a Word, Runaway Jury. He had a decent career. You got Rosenberg's credit, so nobody's career got deep sexed over this film.
No, this was actually the beginning of both their careers, But maybe that's the problem, like you said. Maybe this film was a little too slick, where maybe it should have been a little more gritty.
Yeah.
And then it goes back to, that whole mixture of genres that play out in the film. So maybe that's why. But I can see this as a calling card for both. And like I said, I think even though we disagree on the movie, I think anybody listening to this, if you haven't seen the film, give it a chance. And, write us, comment, tell us what you think. Because, I think it's underrated. So, that ends this week's deep dive. But as you know, there's always plenty more to come. And we shall see you next time.